Good evening to all my friends from India and good morning to my friends from USA. Let me begin by offering my sincere apologies for beginning this program a bit late. We were facing a little bit of a technical challenge, which we have successfully resolved now. So please bear with us. I'm Naushad Panjwani, the Regional President of IACC West India Council. Today I bring to you an event on a topic which IACC as an organization strongly supports and promotes, that is women empowerment and equality for women. ICC has organized numerous technical and non-technical sessions specifically for women. But the one which I'm most proud of is a women delegation which was taken to USA by our then ICC West President, Ms. Madhulika Gupta. In Ms. Rajalakshmi Rao, we have had a very dynamic and deserving woman leader as our immediate past president, national past president. I am also extremely proud that 3 out of the 4 of my predecessors have been women. Coming to the program of the day, the rule of law, cornerstone of good governance and democracy, requires that laws are in place to hold everyone to account, from individual to the government. However, for millions of women and girls around the world, the reality is that the rule of law means little in practice. Two areas in which women's rights are least protected, the rule of law is weakest, and men's privilege is often most entrenched, are her rights in the private and domestic sphere and the right to decent work in the workplace environment. Law is a key component of social change, contributing to the development of norms and providing the framework for translating international standards into national benchmarks. Law can provide a vital mechanism for women to hold individuals and institutions to account and to prevent abuse of power, particularly within the family and the workplace. Without a solid legal foundation, attempts to make courts more accessible to women, make police less hostile to their complaints, and bring in other necessary reforms to the administration of justice are likely to be beyond our reach. Enhancing the ability of women to access justice is essential. Women's empowerment in every aspect of their lives is reliant upon systems of law and justice that work for women. Lady Justice is blindfold, sword, and the scale are reminders that justice should be administered in an impartial, firm, and balanced manner. But what strikes me is that the mascot is a woman, but she's blindfolded. Is it a reminder to women to turn a blind eye to the injustice happening around her? India has gradually marched towards the goal of achieving inclusivity of women in all sectors, and in pursuance of the same, has introduced several laws to achieve this goal. The Constitution of India acknowledges this intention of progressive India. Therefore, the forefathers, realizing the fundamental need of this, ensured to incorporate the same as a fundamental right in the Constitution under Section and Article 50. Gender equality has always been an elusive concept in history, trodden with impediments of narrow-mindedness of society, which took fiendish delight in suppressing women's rights. Even the judiciary remained oblivious to the rights of women. Shamefully, in Bradwell versus State of Illinois, Justice Bradley of the US Supreme Court said, "The natural and proper timidity and delicacy which belongs to the female sex, evidently unfit itself for many of the occupations of civil life. The permanent destiny and mission of a woman are to fulfill the noble and benign office of wife and mother. This is the law of the Creator." Shameful. As clearly as in the year 1908, the Supreme Court of USA had in Mueller versus Oregon realized the importance of role of women in social life, and it stated that women's physical structure and the performance of maternal function places her at a disadvantage for subsistence is obvious. History discloses the fact that women have always depended on men. He established her control in various forms with diminishing insensitivity. Has continued to be in the present. But the situation of women didn't have any substantive changes until the later half of the 20th century. Equality for women was recognized in India as early as in 1925. The Commonwealth of India Bill 1925 in Clause 7 demanded for equality for women before the law and provided that there be no disqualification or disability on the ground only of sex, along with the provisions that all persons were to have equal right to the use of roads, courts of justice, and all other places of business or resort dedicated to the public. Earliest case in India pertaining to women's rights was Air India versus Nargesh Mirza, where the Supreme Court held that the regulation of Air India pertaining to termination of an air hostess if she were to get pregnant within 4 years of service was held to be arbitrary and unconstitutional. This judgment is etched in history of women's rights as an apostle of organizations to regulate the working conditions of women at par with their male counterparts. In Dattatreya versus State, it was held that education institutions established by the state exclusively for women or reservation of seats for women in a college does not offend Article 15. In Rajesh Gupta versus State of UP, the court held that reservation of 50% of posts in favor of female candidates is not arbitrary. The above judgments are a clear example of how judiciary has recognized and has safeguarded the rights of women in India in public life and at workplace. The latest case of Vishakha and others versus State of Rajasthan and others, where the court laid down guidelines to regulate the conditions of the working women and directed that guidelines and norms would be strictly observed in all places for preservation and enforcement of right to gender equality of working women. We all recognize the importance of the judicial intervention in the right at the right time. And recognizing this, IACC has organized this very important program today where we have lawyers from USA and India who are going to discuss the rights of women and the learnings that we have from the developments and the recent developments that have happened in the two countries. Without much ado, let me hand over to Mrs. Singh, the president of Bombay Central, who will take it from me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Naushad. Good evening and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is such an empowering evening today, not because the seminar is on women's rights, but because the August gathering of the women panelists is a manifestation of the fact that women have already got their rights. Today's women, being educated and exposed, not only know how to fight for their rights, but more than that, they know how to earn their rights. And something you have earned is rightfully yours, and no one can take it away from you. As I speak today, I feel so proud of belonging to an era where women are not taught about their rights, but women's right is a baton that has been handed over slowly but surely. Of course, all sizes don't fit one, so all of us have our own experiences to live and learn. So friends, without much ado, I now proceed to introduce our moderator for the evening, Ms. Shubika Bilkha. Shubika is an entrepreneur, leadership coach, author, advisor, partner in EdpowerU. Shubika is the founding partner of EdpowerU that focuses on workplace behavior and personal leadership development of the Gen Z in India. She is a dynamic entrepreneur, media spokesperson, leadership coach, author, corporate advisor, and facilitator with experience that spans across industries in India, and internationally. She has coached and trained a number of professionals and leaders in leadership and workplace skills across corporations, industry associations, and educational institutions in India. Shubika has an ideal combination of corporate experience, having worked with large companies such as Deloitte in corporate finance in London, powered, provided advisory services to a number of small and medium scale businesses, as well as being the managing director of two early stage startups in technology and education. Shubika was most recently the managing director of a leading vocational training institute and has worked with a number of leaders across industry, government, and the educational ecosystem in India and the UK. Shubika is a published author with her first book widely distributed. She is a prominent media spokesperson who regularly contributes to key publications, portals, panels, events, the radio and television channels in India. She has been featured on ET, Z Business, Radio 1 FM, Aaj Tak, India Today, Hindustan Times, Indian Express, to name a few. Shubika is an alumni of Mount Holyoke College, USA, and Columbia Business School, USA, an associate member of the Chartered Securities Institute in the UK, and has completed the Building Excellence in Higher Education institutions at the Indian School of Business, Hyderabad. Shubika has done her executive coaching certification training at CTI London, UK, in line with the International Coaching Federation accreditation guidelines and is currently completing her PCC accreditation. She has also completed a certification in cognitive behavior therapy from the Massachusetts General Hospital, Department of Psychiatry, UK, USA. I am really overwhelmed by Shubika's biodata. And ladies and gentlemen, I think you cannot wait to hear her moderate the entire event. So over to you, Shubika.
Thank you, Nilima, for that introduction. And thank you, Naushad, for setting the context to our conversation here today. When I sent one of my fellow alumni in the invite to the panel here today, she called me immediately to say, wow, look at this illustrious lineup that you have. And why are you there, right? What have you done to be a part of that? So if the mock run was any indication, I think we're all in for quite a conversation here today. I'm slightly intimidated, but also humbled to be on the same screen as some of these amazing women. So I hope I can do them and this very pertinent topic some justice here today. The conversation of women's rights and the topic of women's rights is vast. I think we heard that a little bit in what Naushad was saying. And it extends from everything when it comes to equal representation and participation to violence and sexual harassment. I mean, women are raped once every 16 minutes in India, and over 400,000 rape cases are registered every year in India and the US. And I'm sure a lot of the panelists have more startling data for you. Whether it comes down to maternity, sexual health and contraception, it comes down to education, it comes down to gender pay, it comes down to women's representation at boards, in leadership, discrimination, safety. And I don't know how many of you have tried to, as a single woman, rent an apartment in certain cities like Bombay, I can tell you, Mumbai, I can tell you, is really challenging to even till today to rent an apartment as a single woman. And so the list is endless when it comes to this conversation of women's rights. And as much as I think that this is a crucial conversation for all of us today, it pains me immensely that at the end of the second decade of the 21st century, we are nowhere near equality. We've gone from only 12 heads of state in 1995 to 22 as we look at it today. And we still need to have a discussion around key issues that concern basic human rights of women. Yes, we are all on the panel representative of the fact that women have rights, but there are so many others where the same treatment is not meted out, or who have not been as fortunate to receive some of that. I read an article recently that said that there were concerns that the COVID pandemic had in fact pushed back the women agenda that was set out 25 years ago in the Beijing Convention by a significant amount. And other reports have indicated that at the current pace of change, it will take 250 years to balance the ratio of male to female CEOs in Fortune 500 companies. Now we have about, I think, 60 minutes, and I don't have a lot of patience to wait 250 years to see more CEOs represented in Fortune 500 companies. So there is only a certain amount of issues that we will be tackling over the course of the panel today. And they're going to be relating to all of these points that we talked about, and how do they relate to women in the context of the workplace. And I want to talk about a really important point, which is what constitutes the term workplace. I mean, are we saying that the farm and people who work on their fields is not a workplace? Are we saying that people who work in the informal economy are not going to work? But they are. But I think for the context of our conversation, since we are a chamber of commerce, and I've been given a long list of do's and don'ts, I'm going to, restrict our conversation. Otherwise, we'll be here all night. To what we call maybe the formal or the corporate workplace or the professional workplace. Lawyers, please correct me, so that we can have a conversation around some of those issues. And if we are to set the tone for today's discussion with the famous words of Judge Ruth Ginsburg, of when she was asked, when do you think there'll be enough women in court? And she said, when there are 9. So if we bring that perspective to our conversation here today, that very powerful message coming in from her, let's see what we need to change and what needs to shift to be able to really achieve that vision and to really get that equality in the workplace today. But before we get started, I don't think we need a lot of introduction of the panelists. But I would still like to take a few minutes and give a little bit of context to some of these amazing women who are sharing the screen with me today. And good morning and good evening to all of you. So I'm going to start with who I can see first on my screen, who is Mrunalini, Miss Mrunalini Deshmukh. And I remember when I spoke to her a couple of days ago, I said, you're very famous among all my friends and among our entire family circle, because she's done some amazing work for a number of people who I know. So she's a renowned lawyer, and she's handled a number of high-profile cases dealing with divorce and ancillary issues of custody and maintenance. Owed to her volume of international cases, she has mastered obtaining mirror orders from Indian courts for matters under foreign jurisdiction. She comes from a very illustrious family of constitutional experts, as well as political activists and leaders, and revolutionary leaders, if I may say that. But she's also really involved with the NGO Sampark, which habilitates children of sex workers and HIV-positive parents. And apart from supporting a lot of people in their journey around their marriages or relationships and divorce, despite all of that, she holds values such as family and marriage extremely true to her, which she reflects in her life. So, Ms. Deshmukh, lovely to have you on the panel this evening for you. Next up, I can't see Karuna, but I'm sure she's around and will be a part of our panel today. But she's an advocate of the Supreme Court of India. The focus of her work is constitutional law, commercial litigation and arbitration, media law, and legal policy. She was included by an Economic Times jury in the list of corporate India's fastest rising women leaders. And if you've been on your television screens watching the news the last week, 10 days, you would have seen her pop up quite a bit across news platforms. She's also had a significant role in drafting the anti-rape bill after the 2012 Delhi gang rape. And in 2019, she was also put into the panel of experts by the UK Foreign Office to develop legal frameworks to protect the freedom of media across the globe. She has attended almost every premier institution in whichever country she's been in. She's gone to Stephens in India, she's gone to Cambridge in the UK, and she's a fellow Columbia alum. And she's also worked as a lawyer in the United Nations. So wherever you are, Karuna, I hope you can make it to our screens, but welcome to this conversation here today. Navneet Bhalla joins us from the US and currently serves as the executive director at Manavi. By way of background, Navneet practiced as an attorney in the UK for a number of years and had a lot of experience in immigration law, human rights law, and employment law. As an attorney in the UK, she's represented approximately 300 asylum seekers from various countries, and she's advocated for immigrant rights and women's rights to address gender-based violence within the context of international human rights law. A little bit about Manavi. It's a New Jersey-based South Asian not-for-profit dedicated to ending all forms of violence against South Asian survivors. And it's founded in 1985. And it was the first organization in the US to address the unmet needs of South Asian women affected by violence. And prior to Manavi, Navneet has done a variety of things, from being a part of the International Rescue Committee, a legal consultant to the International Rescue Committee, as well as leading a national not-for-profit called SALT, South Asian Americans Leading Together. But more interestingly, she speaks 5 languages. She's fluent in Punjabi, Hindi, Urdu, Farsi, and English. And I'm sure we can get her to do, since Urdu and Farsi are such poetic languages, I'm sure she'll have a little bit of a couplet ready for us. I hope at least. So welcome, good morning to you, and welcome to the conversation. And our next panelist is Lakshmi Chala, if I pronounce it correctly. Just a quick round of applause for her. She was just named this week as the Woman of the Year by the Metropolitan Business League. And so this came as a quick update to her profile just today. So it's very fresh, and we're happy to share the news. She's the managing attorney of the Challa Law Group and has practiced immigration law exclusively for over 20 years at her law firm headquartered in Richmond. Ms. Challa obtained her law degree from the University of Richmond as well as from Andhra University. So she's got a little bit of both, so she can give us an interesting perspective. And apart from all the work that she's done in the field of immigration law, she has also partnered with the Virginia Poverty Law Center and the University of Richmond in developing an immigration clinic that assists victims of domestic violence and unaccompanied minor children with their immigration needs. And she largely does a lot of this on a pro bono basis. So in addition to receiving the John Kenny Pro Bono Award, she was also nominated for the Lewis Powell Pro Bono Award by the Virginia State Bar. So you can see we have this amazing room, and I'm sure you don't want to hear from me anymore. So we're going to get right into the panel, and I'm going to ask my first question. So as prominent legal figures in the US, UK, and India, as we set context to our conversation here today, what would be really helpful is if you could, for the sake of our audience, give us a short outline of how have you seen women's rights evolve? Any landmark judgments, examples that come to mind, and the impact that it has had on the participation of women in the workplace, as well as any prominent gaps that do continue to exist and that stand out for you at this current time. So I'm going to give each one of you a couple of minutes, maybe 3-4 minutes, to go through your thoughts. And we will start with, Mrunalini, if you're up for it. we'll start with you and then go to Navneet and then go to Lakshmi, and hopefully by then Karuna will join us this evening.
So good evening and good morning to all the lovely panelists here. It's indeed a great honor and pleasure to be a part of this dynamic, vibrant panel, which is going to discuss the issues which are very close to my heart and something which I also practice as a lawyer in my profession. I should thank particularly Naushad for inviting me and making me a part of this. Thank you, Naushad. Thank you, Shubika, for all the generous, warm words that you had for me. And I'm really overwhelmed with this. Now, the subject of women's rights, as you know, has been going on, being discussed in courts, outside social platforms, political platforms, for over a period of time. And I would like to take you back a little bit to the history of this, and without spending much of time on that. The social reformers initially, and I'm talking about 200 years or 300 years back, have been men who have thought that it is high time that women are given that share of right and equality in this. And in the Indian context, we had people like Rajaram Mohan Roy, Dr. Ambedkar, or even Justice Ranade, who valued women as an integral part of the society. In the age and era, please remember, when women were supposed to be secondary citizens and secondary. So I think a lot goes to such thinkers and who were men at that point of time. Since then, the history of the women's right has been a journey with a lot of problems, with a lot of roadblocks. There's been a lot of how would I say, difficulties that women had to face. But I think, and with the utmost respect to the men over here, I think a woman is born with the grit and determination to fight, come what way. It is just the way you can multitask. It's just the way you can manage your home, you can manage your work, you can manage everything and still fight for a cause which is close to your heart in any other format which is there. Now, coming from there, this is what we have seen the journey. And to give a little perspective, and I'm sure all the lawyers would understand, that it was the Constitution of India which gave the equality under Article 14 and 15 of the Constitution, which says that men and women are equal and there'll be no discrimination on the grounds of gender or sex, which is there. But at the same time, you'll have to remember the same Constitution in Article 15, subclause 3 says, nothing shall prohibit or prevent the state from making special laws for women and children. Now, the question that arises is that how is it that in the same Constitution, when Article 15 talks about prohibition of discrimination on the grounds of sex, religion, caste, creed, etc., has these things? The reason for this was the social structure that existed in the time when the Constitution was drafted. You can only have equality on this level. If women were here, and there has to be meaningful equality, you had to raise the bar to make them equal, to make Articles 14 and 15 an effective one. And that is why, and that is where even the women's rights movement had started, if I may say so. And later on, we have seen that the judiciary has been an excellent, with the judicial activism, brought about a lot of changes within for the rights. You can see the latest judgment and the Triple Talaq case, where Shaira Banu case was there. I mean, some age-old things which are going on for years, which was oppressive to the women, to our Muslim sisters. And this was a law that was struck down as being, unconstitutional, illegal, giving those women a right to be dealt in an equal fashion. Because though we are governed by the personal laws, we are also governed by a bigger law, that is the equality and the human rights. So I will talk about it a little more in the different questions which are there. But I think as an opening statement, I would only like to say that it has been a combined effort of all the women folk. It has been a combined effort of the women, the courts, the judges, the activists, and all of us to bring us here, where all of us can today talk about it with so much of it. How much have we achieved? How much we do need to achieve will come a little later as the discussion goes rolling. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrunalini. Navneet, can I move it over to you?
Sure, absolutely. Good morning and good evening to everyone joining us today. I want to thank you for having Manavi represented here today. This is something that just, like all the women panelists, it's very close to my heart and something I feel very passionately about. So I think for me, at least, the starting point of the conversation would be to frame women's rights as human rights in order for women to have full and equal participation in all aspects of society, we need to recognize that it's their fundamental, or it's our fundamental human right. And despite, the past century, if you look at it, there have been numerous domestic laws, international human rights laws, recognizing some of these rights. But ultimately, we need to look at how many of those rights have actually been realized in reality. And we see very often that there is a lag between what we see on paper, in statutes, and I mean this globally, that this is not necessarily just in India, even in the US. What we see and what is actually being implemented, and the reality on the ground for many women. So some of the reasons, and I think the primary reason for this, is that there is still, unfortunately, deep-rooted patriarchy. And there are specific cultural and gender norms that, despite what culture, ethnicity you may belong to, this is, I would say, a global pandemic of its own that we need to recognize and acknowledge. And it's, considering we're discussing, we're also in the midst of a pandemic, this is something that has been an ongoing historic pandemic that we need to acknowledge. And in terms of evolution of women's rights, Justice Ginsburg has been absolutely instrumental, I would say, not only in the United States, but the ripple effects of her work globally for girls and women of all generations has been very impactful. So although Justice Ginsburg has made huge strides and advanced women's rights over the years, and we have come a long way, I would argue that we have a long way to go. So just to kind of give a very quick historical background in terms of the legal piece here. It was, I think, the 1920s when women were actually granted the right to vote. So if you think about that before 1920, women could not even exercise their right to vote. It's 1963 is when we had the Equal Pay Act passed by Congress. In 1964, which is a year after, and this was instrumental, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act was passed, where it was prohibited. Sex discrimination in employment was prohibited. Now, despite that being the case, we have seen many, many legal challenges and legal cases as recent as 2007. And the famous case that we've had recently has been the Lilly Ledbetter case, which I can discuss in subsequent questions when we talk about that. And also in 1974, this something I think for everyone to realize, how even something as basic as women having a credit card and being able to sign a mortgage without a male co-signer. When I said that to my 13-year-old daughter, she was absolutely flabbergasted. So I told her that 1974, the year that I happened to be born, was the year when the Equal Credit Opportunity Act was passed, which meant that was the year when a woman could actually have a credit card and sign a mortgage without needing a male co-signer. I find that shocking, and I totally realize why my 13-year-old daughter found that shocking. 1974 is not that long ago, and this is the United States we're talking about. So perhaps it's not as progressive as we would all like to think. And even in 1978 is when the Pregnancy Discrimination Act was passed, which bans employment discrimination against pregnant women, which strengthened protection for pregnant women. And I'm not going to go through the whole list of statutes, but there have been many, but also to recognize that it's not just domestic legislation, even on international level, and international human rights law is something very close to my heart. It was, I think, when is it 1979 is when the Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women was passed, and that's essentially known globally as the International Bill of Rights for Women. So that's 1979. So if you think about, it's not that long ago when all these statutes were put on paper domestically and on an international level, And that's pretty recent. So we have a long way to go to ensure that they're actually implemented and enforced on a global level. And I think I would say that US is in line with many other countries where we really need to make much more progress. And the only final point I will say before moving on in the interest of time is that I think it's really important to have men be equally engaged in the women's rights movement. I also have an 8-year-old son, in addition to my 13-year-old daughter, and this is a conversation in our household all the time, that women's rights movement is not something that only the women bear the burden of carrying. We need men to be equally involved, engaged, step up in the women's rights movement, shoulder to shoulder next to us to advance women's rights.
Thank you for that, Navneet. And I think a lot of similar themes coming between the, the opening remarks of Mrunalini and yourself from, sort of rights to realization. And while the paperwork indicates a number of things, is it actually being executed? And it's not just the responsibility of women. There is an ecosystem that needs to propel and move this agenda forward. So thank you for those opening remarks. And Lakshmi, can I move that over to you, please?
Sure. I would say let's start from a case that was very impactful recently against Harvey Weinstein, the sexual harassment case. It was a really impactful case from a legal perspective because it was the first time that although some of the women had consented earlier, they still found that there was inequity in terms of the power, and it will be really impactful because very few of these cases actually go forward, and in about 1,000 cases, 995 times the perpetrator gets free. So it was almost of it as if the courts were saying, "Hey, we hear you, we understand you, we see you now." But the problem is, as I think the other panelists wonderfully pointed out, is that you've got the law, you've got opportunity, and then you have the cultural and other mindsets that have to be changed, right? So with the law, for example, in the realm of equal protection, there are different levels of scrutiny, and foreign nationals, racial, various racial ethnic groups get the higher strict scrutiny. So they have to, the state has to show a compelling state interest in using this disparate treatment. And they have, the basis for that in a layman's term is because they have found that these individuals, they have qualities that make them look different. So it can be applied that that is the basis for the reason for discrimination. Gender, however, has always taken the lower standard of intermediate scrutiny, which means you don't have to show a compelling state interest, you only have to show an important state interest. And what that does is it makes it a lot more difficult to bring forth challenges of equal protection. And then, you have opportunities. And I tell young women this all the time because, if you think back to, I know the theme today, especially because it's hard to forget Justice Ginsburg, Sandra Day O'Connor, even though they graduated top in their class, they couldn't get a job. So it's widened. So the opportunity to get in has been opened up. But I say it's almost like a pyramid. So the higher you go, the more narrow your opportunities become. And I'll give you a clear example of that now, is that the Harvard Business Review did an analysis of the Supreme Court and found that 69% of the time, their male justices interrupted them and spoke over them, more so than they did their fellow male colleagues. So here is a justice who could not get a job at the beginning, fought for gender rights her whole life. She gets on the highest court of the land, and she is subjected to, where the women make up 24% of the Supreme Court over the past number of years, that these women were interrupted by male advocates more, by their colleagues, justices more, at a 69% rate. And whereas the women interrupted the men at a 4% rate. So, it seems to me that, number one, I think we have come a long way in the law with all the things going forward, but unless we have an equal rights amendment that gives women that higher standard, so that there is strict scrutiny when, when evaluating equal protection cases, I think there's going to be a problem. The opportunity is very imbibed with the whole fact of the cultural or the perception of the norm. Because until we have these gender-driven power plays and gender-driven perceptions, and I put this all in the cultural realm, we're not, no matter how many changes that take place, whether it's in the law, whether it's in opportunity, unless there's a deliberate effort for corporations, for organizations, to and quite frankly, training to reassess those insidious type bias that's implicit in these old systemic structures, we're not going to see any progression going forward. You're going to reach a point, yes, you're able to get a job after you get out of law school, but your ability to then excel and go up is going to be greatly diminished. I think it's the rate at which I think it's 93% of the top law firms, the top 10 earners in the law firms are men. And so, like I said, it is this whole idea of you've got the law, you've got, which may be the engine, you've got the opportunity that may be the wheels, but the real fuel behind this is that systemic within the way we think and in the way in which we perceive.
Thank you, Lakshmi, for that insightful opening address. Is Karuna on the panel?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you. I can hear you. We can't see
Great.
you, but we can hear you.
Okay.
So, Karuna, if you could give your opening address, that would be great.
Mrunalini, Deshmukh, Lakshmi Chala, Navneet, Bhalla, Nilima, Singh. This has been incredibly interesting so far, and I am so glad to be in this panel. Hello, Shubika. Hello, Mr. Shah and Mr. Panjwani. Now, I didn't realize that this would be a conversation of legal sophistication. I'm very glad that it is, because I think there's a lot to be discussed in the interactions on women's rights between the US Constitution and the Indian. Now, there has already been a judicial conversation on it. As Mrunalini Deshmukh quite correctly, I think, centered the Article 15 argument that we as a jurisdiction, I think, should try to forward and develop to the greatest extent possible, because Article 14 of our Constitution speaks of equality and rule of law in a vertical manner with regards to the state, right? And Article 15 speaks of equality with regard to shops and establishments, but it's being expanded in the Nalsar judgment and also in other judgments to have regard in larger ways, whether it's through transgenders. And so the idea of sex, the definition of sex, has been expanded to also read as sexual orientation or as gender, which I think is very important. But also, as I said, the horizontal aspect of the claiming of rights. Now, as Navneet Bhalla, I think, pointed out, the RBG standard of strict scrutiny that I think is incredibly valuable is also in our jurisdiction now. because the Supreme Court found in the Anuj Garg judgment that, in fact, why don't I just read it out? They found in the Anuj Garg judgment that when the Punjab Excise Act prohibited women from working in bars, that any protective legislation must pass that standard of strict scrutiny, right? Now, this is really important because otherwise the handle on legislation that seeks to protect women is harder to argue as being substantively discriminatory. But the court said that it is to be borne in mind that legislations with pronounced protective discrimination aims, such as this one, potentially serve as double-edged swords. So the strict scrutiny test should be employed while assessing the implications of this variety of legislation. Legislation should not be only assessed on its proposed aims, but rather on the implications and the effects. The impugned legislation suffers from incurable fixations of stereotype morality. It's very important. And conception of sexual roles. This perspective thus arrived at is outmoded in content and stifling in meaning. So that's actually quite a high standard. And the nice thing, and this is what Ruth Ginsburg was trying to do, I think, in her whole career, like she only argued 6 Supreme Court cases, but she won 5 out of those, right? And what she did in all of those cases is that she attempted to set standards, not just in that particular case or that particular area, but she attempted to set litmus tests for all legislation. So I think that Anuj Garg does that, and Anuj Garg is incredibly useful. When I think one of the previous panelists spoke of involving men and boys, and people across the gender spectrum. This is fundamental, and in our case, challenging the constitutionality of marital rape, and as all of you will know, the marital rape law says that if a woman is married to her rapist, then the rape is not to be considered rape at all. It's legal sex, right? Under the criminal law, but this can be prosecuted under the Domestic Violence Act, and in the judges' trainings that and workshops that I've done with the National Judicial Academy and the Delhi Judicial Academy, I've also been quite heartened to hear that many of these cases are accepted by judges when they are prosecuted under Section 354 and Section 377, where these are applicable, because 354 is just sexual assault short of rape, and 377 has gone through a whole period of flux, but it's unlawful carnal intercourse against the order of nature, right? Where there is no marital exception. So anyway, so one of the things that we're arguing there is the Article 19(1) point, which is that if you take away the right of a woman to say no, you also take away her right to say yes. So what you're doing is you're taking away her ability to express herself sexually, right? And there's a whole variety of expression and association rules that rights, constitutional rights that you take away. And in that, we have the forum of engagement forum for engagement of men that has intervened, and it is supporting us in those arguments. And they're saying that, look, we don't want to be married to women who are legal subjects and sexual objects. We want our women to be equal partners, and we want the women that we are married to have the capability to be able to say a joyous yes to us, right? And I think that in addition, the point on prevention is very well taken, and I think it's fundamental to the implementation of our law, because real justice happens before the woman is raped, before the woman puts in all that work and suffers a lack of promotion in a discriminatory way, before she stuffs herself up in the house and fails to go for a walk in the middle of the night. And our government exists in order to provide these freedoms. They do not take this work at all seriously. We need budgetary allocations, finance bills to support the implementation of these laws before the crime occurs. And every time we hear of a Hathras, or we hear of a Balrampur, or we hear of all of these assaults, there's all this ex post facto focus on justice in that particular case. But what we need is representation, equal or more, as Ruth Ginsburg said, when we'll, it'd be good to have 9 women on the Supreme Court. And when we speak of representation, we speak of reservation for Dalits. We speak of a diverse representation of different kinds of women. It's about these finance bills, as I said. It's about a variety. It's about an overhaul of these judicial systems, because piecemeal work doesn't cut it anymore. Thank you.
Thank you for those words, Karuna. I would actually extend what Judge Ruth Ginsburg said, and I don't think it's when there are 9 women. It's when there are 9 professionals who are women, or 9 lawyers who are women. So I think for me, just some of those powerful takeaways from sort of what you were talking about, and 2 things really stood out, which was real justice happens before. Right before in the context of what you're saying, rape or any injustice takes place, real justice happens at that point before. And I think that's sort of echoed in terms of what all the panelists said in their opening remarks, is how do you build an ecosystem, a society, a framework that is cutting the standards, to use Ruth Ginsburg's words, so that there is that equal participation, and it isn't a conversation after, or it isn't the conversation that we're having today, but the conversation that happens before the change, or before there is a significant push towards that kind of equality or equal representation. So just going away from some of these comments and going back to the context of the workplace. There are, while we do see progress in so many areas and so many realms, what we also see, especially in the context of India at the moment, is a decline in labor force participation. And while there is sort of a lot of social reasons and behavioral factors, which I think you all have all indicated, that it's not just about just putting in a law, it's also about changing a mindset. That's important. But in general, when we're looking at even the gross enrollment rate of women in higher education, there's a very high dropout rate of women after graduation. There's an even higher dropout rate if you look at the context of post-maternity. We do a lot of work in the diversity and inclusion space, and what we see in corporate executives in our reports is that about 40% of women drop out even in mid to senior positions after maternity. So while there are all these laws that are written, and as we're saying constantly, right, that dichotomy between mindset, execution, paperwork, is how do we make all of this a reality when we think, when we look at the context of the workplace? In the US as well, you have, sort of equal pay is still such a big challenge across industries and across professions. Even in athletes, it's been a huge point for all of them. So, Karuna, just going back to you, if we had to work with the judicial framework that we are a part of, I know you suggested an overhaul. So what is the one change that you think we could effect very easily? So I'm going away from the script I sent you guys, but we're running out of time and I'm just clubbing everything else. What is the one change that you think we could effect immediately or easily, or sort of relatively easily, to be able to bring some form of a shift and bring that vision of actual equality into the workplace?
If we recruit, promote, and penalize the officers of the state, whether they're judicial officers or prosecutors or police, from a perspective of constitutional values, right? Which means that you make sure that not only are there enough women, enough Dalit people, enough transgender people, but you also make sure that these people are being tested at the point of interview, at the point of promotion, right? And being penalized for any actions that they may have taken that are contrary to constitutional values, to equality, to gender equality, to Dalit equality. You know? I think that would be incredibly helpful, because automatically then a whole bunch of things fall into place.
Yeah, I think that's an extremely powerful perspective in the point of recruitment, promotion, and penalization. If it's at that point, if you can effect some forms of change and some forms of some filters, we can maybe see the ripple effect of that be quite impactful. Mrunalini, I'm just going to move the conversation over to you. And in your opening address, you talked about, the impact of COVID. And also you talked about how amazing women are. We can balance so many things and still, be passionate about causes that matter. And actually, when we look at the context of COVID, it has been a lot harder for women than it has for men. There are enough reports and there's a lot of research that's indicated that the onus of whether it's the family, it's the home, all of these things fall largely on the women. And I think for all the years that we have fought for, whether it's maternity benefits, equality, representation, equal chance, one of the things that you see in corporates is what is going to happen to the women's agenda when people are trying to streamline costs and manage headcount. So when you look at this entire context of, one is the pressure that women are under on account of COVID, and the second is the pressure that companies are in on account of the financial and economic situation, what challenges do you see play out, and how can legislation, how can any legal framework support this to ensure that there is still that women's agenda of recruitment and retention, and that doesn't get dissipated in this COVID, managing of this COVID pandemic?
So I think it's a very interesting sort of question and a perspective that you have brought out in this. And basically in the backdrop of this COVID pandemic that we're talking about. Now, again, as Karuna has very succinctly put it, that there are challenges that women face at every stage in every part of it. I'm sure there must be, men must be also facing that, but right now let's talk about it. And one of the things that you rightly brought out now is that despite legislation like the Maternity Benefit Act, etc., are women still marginalized as far as the work is concerned? Are women still feel, taking the flack of the motherhood, if I may use that word, as a thing for their career and the growth in their career? And lastly, and more importantly, how do you strike a balance between what the woman wants and how the company goes about it? I think the basic thing that I think is all as a principle or as a guiding light, if you see one thing which is there, that if women are kept in a position of comfort, both at home and work, we can really expect miracles from them. And right now, just talking about the workplace, which is obvious there, even despite the fact that there are sometimes, I would hate to use the word impediments, but there are certain sort of gaps that you have to take in your career because you're a mother and you have to look after your child. You have to do the balancing act of being a good mother, taking care of the child, at the same time not compromising with it. So this is going to be a big challenge which is there. I think what the organizations and the companies can do to be able to give such kind of women a little bit a better environment, and that has been stated even by we see the Supreme Court of India also, to provide facilities like what is known as the creches. So a woman, and I think why should it only be a woman's responsibility to look after the child? Why can the male partner or the husband not have a creche which is attached to his organization where he's equally responsible for it? So I think that is one, and that's why the change in the mindset is so necessary, to understand that raising a child is a duty of both the parents, which is there. That is point number one. And I think, if I may just see a silver lining in entire COVID situation, is there work from home. I think work from home, which has been something kind of a new work from home. I mean, Karuna knows, I know, we sit in our chambers and we can talk to the Supreme Court judges and argue the matter. Similarly, people like you who work in the corporate sector, you can be at your home or you can be wherever you are, and you are able to sort of, carry on your work. This becomes a little bit of a benefit for such women, especially for women who have to combine their home and if they have a child and they have to do that. So we could even consider, and even the companies could consider, cost-wise, effective-wise, everything which is there, to be able to bring about a situation that more and more women who have children or who have to look after certain situations at home are able to work from home, even, God willing, very soon the pandemic goes away, so that there is effective participation by the women in the quality of the work that she's doing, without compromising on what she has to do. And she's good at multitasking, but she's a human being at the end of it. You have to give her that extra sort of little cushion or a comfort to do that. This is what I feel would be a better way to look at it.
Thank you, Mrunalini, for that. Lakshmi, I think when we were having a conversation yesterday, you said that when, the early point in your career, you were struggling to tell people that you had a child, because the perspective they would take on you would be quite different. So just following on from, sort of this conversation and a couple of the comments that Mrunalini has made, what are you seeing, companies in the US do to be able to ensure that there isn't that shift away from the women's agenda, and we're still going to see equal participation, recruitment, retention, despite all of the challenges? And of course, work from home has actually worked well for a lot of women as well, and it's been a little difficult, which I'm sure Navneet will throw light on a little bit later. But if you could comment on that would be great.
ABA is now really looking into why law firms aren't able to retain women. They're 50% of the graduates in law schools now. I think 45% of the M200 hire female associates, but only 25% of them stay. And, I had spoken, I think it was last year, to a bunch of medical and medical professionals, doctors and so forth, and I gave them a CMA on, and it was entitled Juggling the Many Pieces of Me. So I think to a certain extent, we've got to reevaluate what we think about time. So we, as meaning women. So when I started out, because we couldn't, it was still deemed that because women can give birth and they have primary responsibility of children, we would try to downplay it so that that wouldn't be perceived as a weakness. And as a result, at least within my generation, it was work, home, work, home. That's it. And what I tried to tell these women is, the problem is we think of allocations, right? We think if we take time away from work and we go see family, spend time with family, or see friends, or maybe exercise and meditate and do something that's good for us, that we are taking time away from something and we're putting it into something else. That's not the case. So there are so many studies that show that actually it's almost like fusion. Doing all of this, you're pouring into the vessel of you and making yourself better. So there's studies that have shown that spending time with family members makes a worker more productive during the day. If you allow that flexibility. Marriott hotels tested that out, and they found that, giving parents that flexibility to go to soccer games and to spend time with their children, helped them immensely. And so I think we have to tell ourselves that as women that, okay, you can do it all, but it's not going to be 50-50 all the time. It's sometimes I'm going to spend, if I've got a major project going on at work, I'm going to spend 80% of my time on work and maybe 20% of my time on home. And sometimes I'll spend only 20% of my time at work and 80% of time on home. I'll allocate some time to me and doing the things that feed me so I can become a better professional. Because at the age of, I don't know, I think it was when I was in my mid 40s, our neighborhood had a book club. And I thought I'd go to the book. I've never gone to a book club. I said, oh, let me go to the book club. And then my son came home. My son is now 27, my daughter's 33, but my son came home and I said, oh, you came home. I'm not going to go, because my idea was I can't go if my child is home because I work. I've got to. And he looked at me, he goes, Mom, please go make some friends, because he knew that I wasn't doing anything else. So I think, we have to stop being so hard on ourselves and develop these within us, because unless we say it's okay and we think it's okay, no matter what structures there are, we're not going to facilitate change. And I think I told you that the funny thing was that I had an associate that was a male. So you think of these in terms of something that are female issues in the workplace, but the balance of life, work and family, is something, as Mrunalini pointed out, is important for all. So my male associate was sitting there and his phone is pinging, and it just hit me. And that's why women are so effective at leadership, because we're intuitive. So then I didn't have to be told, but I thought, oh my God, he's got 4 children under the age, so young at home, like the eldest is in the 1st grade. His wife must be going crazy at home with these kids all day. And so I looked at him and I said, you need to go home, be with your family. I don't care when you do the work, I don't care how it gets done, but go home and be with your family. This time's not going to come back again. So it's got to be that understanding. I think when we bring everyone into that conversation and we apply it equally to everyone, it no longer becomes a woman's issue. It becomes a workplace productivity issue. This is a way we can improve productivity. And so I think that, like I said before, the structures are in place, but as you get higher up, you're more reticent. I think if corporations are starting to realize, law firms are starting to realize that there is a benefit in having, in retaining females that they, spent so much time training and building up. And so I think that mindset is changing. And I also think that we as women should really imbibe what is truly authentic, our leadership style. At the beginning, the leadership style was very male-centric, so I tried to be a man. And so now it is more of the emotion, compassion, EQ.
Sure.
Shubika,
Thanks for all those.
Just one. So 2 very quick things. One is I am sort of requesting that don't cut short your questions. The topic is important. I don't think many organizations have this program, and we are fortunate to have such a lovely panel. Please don't cut your question. Just requesting the panelists to make their answers precise so that we can cover as many questions as possible. Thanks, and sorry for this interruption.
Okay, so we have the leeway to keep going. So Lakshmi, thanks for pointing that out. And a lot of my work is around workplace productivity. In fact, that's this area I specialize in. So I can understand when you talk about how we tend to think of it in buckets and silos and taking away from one rather than moving to the other. But I'm going to move to a slightly more difficult situation in the workplace, and I'm going to take that over to Navneet, because I can't possibly have a conversation today on women's rights without discussing the most crucial piece that forms the basis for women's rights, and that is safety, value, and respect. And I started, the panel highlighting how it pains me to even need this to be a discussion point at this time. And it also angers me, that violence against women, sexual harassment, and just so many atrocities persist at a rampant scale. Even today in our society, we're seeing that, all over. COVID has in fact seen instances of the increase of domestic violence, as well as violence, a lot of sexual harassment cases coming up for posh hearings in the workplace. I mean, even when people are working from home, you're still seeing the prevalence of sexual harassment in the workplace. And we've had movements such as Me Too that have come in, and you mentioned the Harvey Weinstein case. And they've caused some stir, but there is this larger landscape that's demanding serious action, penalty, and all of that. And somewhere, as I think society, judiciary, mindset, all of this, people, families, we seem to have fallen short to be able to effect this basic human right. Because without safety, without value, without respect, there is never going to be any rights for women. So I know each one of you has, I've seen your videos and I've seen you voice your opinions so eloquently on these very issues. So I would like you, Navneet, to start and just tell us a few minutes, spend a few minutes just telling us, in your opinion, what do we need to do to be able to actually bring this much needed change to ensure basic rights for women? And feel free to throw in some statistics and data. I know you've been doing a lot of work of when women are working from home, the instances of abuse have increased. So please feel free to share some of that. And I'll give each one of you a couple of minutes to talk about that on the panel. I think it's too important to not discuss it.
Thank you so much. And this absolutely is a crucial topic that needs to be addressed time and time again. So in just terms of some of the statistics, more than 1 in 3 women have experienced physical violence or stalking or rape by an intimate partner in their lifetime. This is the United States. Just to put into context, nearly 8 million women are raped, physically assaulted, or stalked by a current or former intimate partner each year. 8 million, let that number sink in. And nationwide, an average of 3 women are killed by a current or former intimate partner every day. Every day, again. So the reason I say these numbers is, I think, to point out that if these numbers, just imagine, and I want to put it in more of a, I guess, paint a real picture here. Imagine you switch on the TV and the news says it's, 3 people every day are being killed. It would be a horrifying piece of news. Why is it this nationally, like in terms of an intimate partner setting in a family setting? I think this is such a systemic issue that a lot of this is not even covered as news. The fact that 3 women per day are being killed by intimate partners is not covered as news. Sexual harassment, rape, all these things, I think we have come to a point as a society where we've become numb and subconsciously begun to, unfortunately, accept that this is just the way it is. And that is where the root of the problem is, where I've said earlier that there is deep-rooted patriarchy and there are gender norms and cultural norms that need to shift. That's precisely what I was referring to. I have been in conversations amongst neighbors or in workplaces where you hear victim blaming and things being said where the blame is put on the woman. If there's sexual harassment case, if there's sexual assault, if there's any DV, the starting point very often is, she shouldn't have been in this place at this time, or she shouldn't have worn this, or she shouldn't have engaged, or the starting point tends to be victim blaming. And I think that's the biggest cultural shift we need to make as a society, to shift that burden on the abuser, on the perpetrator, on the person who committed that crime, and define it as a crime and also as a violation of fundamental human right, which is why I keep saying that women's rights absolutely need to be framed under human rights umbrella. So in terms of a systemic change, again, I put the onus on men here, in that when we have these conversations, if you're having a conversation and there's a sexist joke being said, you need to step up and say that's unacceptable. If there is something being said about a woman, the way she dresses or the way that she behaves in a workplace, which is demeaning, you need to speak up and stand up and challenge those statements. These are the basic cultural shifts that need to be made. At Manavi, we absolutely have seen that during COVID, there has been, initially, there was a dip in that. And I just want to point out to everyone, imagine being in quarantine with your abuser. To many of us, our home is a safe place to be, right? This is like you're safe in your home. But during quarantine, domestic violence survivors were quarantined with their abusers. And at Manavi, we had seen many situations, working women, as well as, you know, women who work in the home as a domestic setting. And another myth I want to kind of challenge is that domestic violence survivors or survivors come from all realms of life. So we've had survivors who've emigrated from India and South Asia and may not be skilled, but at the same time, we have survivors who are lawyers and doctors and professionals in the workplace. And financial abuse is a huge piece of this, where a woman may be earning a lot of money and may be the one who's actually running the household, and yet it's the male who is controlling the finances. And that's the piece of financial abuse. And during COVID, we absolutely have seen some very challenging and horrific cases where women have been isolated in quarantine. And gender-based violence is something we need to absolutely prioritize. And I mean, challenging it.
Thank you, Navneet. Karuna, could I move that over to you, the same question over to you? Again, just if you could take a couple of minutes, like 2 minutes, then we could move forward to all the other panelists. Thank you.
I think Karuna possibly has left because 8 o'clock she had a TV show.
Right. Okay. Okay. So we'll move it over to Mrunalini.
Yes, I will speak only for 2 minutes. I think what we really need to understand about these sexual harassment or these cases of domestic violence is the origin of that comes from a power equation. It is about the man feeling powerful and being able to, maybe biologically, historically, and over the period of time, by way of custom, being the superior of the lot. So if I feel that I'm so powerful that I can do whatever I need to do for the women, that's where this equation of violence comes in. Obviously, violence of any form has to be, is condemned, is not acceptable to any woman which is there. But much as we may talk on the webinars and we may talk on the television channels and in different seminars that we hold, of course, nowadays no physical seminars are there, but all these things really, really do not still bring about that change that is required in the patriarchal and in some misogynist mindset that some people have. And this change needs to be brought about. And as one of the panelists, I think it was Navneet or Lakshmi, I think it was Navneet who said that absolutely to be able to cut down on the violence, whether at workplace or the sexual violence, either at workplace or at the domestic violence at home, it is the man who needs to be empowered with knowledge that what he does is wrong and what are the consequences there. We women don't need to talk about it, that we need to be empowered. You can't have violence on me. We all know that. We all have, some of us have gone through it. Some of us have represented women who have gone through it. I think this is a learning lesson we need to give men. We need to train our boys, that is our children, if we are teachers, the students who are there, our colleagues, and otherwise these things have to be there. Once this mindset changes, I'm so hopeful that we'll have very few cases of violence which is at home or which is also at workplace. And one last thing, 30 seconds more, is absolutely right, Navneet has said, that during the pandemic and the lockdown, where a lot of women were sort of trapped in their homes with their partners, husbands, etc., it was the nightmare of the worst kind. You are trapped with the person who is your abuser. And unfortunately, at least in Mumbai, I can tell you, I don't know, Navneet, about what happened in the US, but I can surely tell you that when women would approach the police, I would not say the police did not have the apathy or they did not have this, but they were so much with their COVID and pandemic, which was going on, did not have time to attend to these things. So they would then reach out to individual NGOs or the individual lawyers to give them some guidance, which was there. So some of the things which we never expected, but obviously nobody expected a pandemic also. So this, one of the things was the domestic violence was at its peak. And it was also found that they had very little voice to be expressed because who's going to listen to them? There was nobody to listen to them. And I think that's the worst part of the pandemic, besides whatever happened to the health of a lot of few people. Thank you.
Thank you for those thoughts. A lot of common themes coming in, whether it's on the mindset, it's on the balance of power, it's on the conversation that men need to have, and the sensitization and sort of the drilling in really that needs to take place. And the difficult statistics that we're seeing, or instances that have come about at COVID, where women across the board have had to endure all forms of abuse, and which is disheartening. Lakshmi, is there any additional thoughts that you would like to share on this topic before we go to the last question?
Sure. I was going to say that I know a lot has been covered. One piece that I would add to that is I think there needs to be, there are some components that are globally applicable, but there's some that are, very specific to geographic regions. Certain places in Africa, certain places in India. I think the education of young women and giving the importance of that education and having them, come forward so they're not deemed to be a burden, but they can actually be an asset to the family, is critical. I know that we are working, and I want to clarify this, all my work for victims of domestic violence and trafficking victims is pro bono. I will not make money off of, I make money off the corporation. And so one of the initiatives we were working on before COVID hit is to try to partner with, the community colleges and the companies to make sure that for these women that are in these, shelters, that there can be some training, maybe a job for them, so that the recidivism to go back to their abuser can be reduced. So I think it's trying to look for unique ideas, and sometimes, like I said, that means looking at it in the context of your environment.
Thanks for that, Lakshmi. And I think let's not forget that we are, apart from being successful professionals that all of you are also women. And I am a leadership coach, so I cannot leave this panel without moving the conversation a little bit towards you as individuals, to understand how you have overcome the challenges during this time. Let's take COVID, or even in your careers. What is the biggest challenge that you have had to overcome, and what's the one superpower that you had to use to overcome it? So if I can just throw in that personal question, what's the one challenge, whether in your career or during COVID, that you have had to overcome, and what's the superpower that you have had to dig into and use to overcome it? If we can go Navneet, Mrunalini, and Lakshmi.
I think the one biggest challenge is definitely juggling motherhood and career, and so that would be a challenge. And I have to say that to balancing it, my husband has definitely played an instrumental role in making that happen, as have my in-laws. That I think it's not just a spouse, it's also your family setting. So, and just to give a 30-second example, I was passionate about international human rights law, and I was able to go to Sudan as a mother of an 18-month-old and work for the International Rescue Committee purely because of the support of my husband and my in-laws, and still be present as a mother. So it was on Juggling, but we came in as a family because they said, well, if my husband had expressed and wanted to do that, we all would have stepped in and done the same. So it was just a simple no-brainer that, of course, and like someone said earlier, that raising a child and raising a family shouldn't primarily be something that's just that this is only exclusively the mother's job. So I think and having just a positive attitude, and for me, I think also realizing that it's okay for me not to be on top of everything at the same time. And this is to Lakshmi's point. Some days I spend amazing quality time with my children and I love it. And some days I am like in back-to-back Zoom calls with work and I love it. And it's just taking each thing as a stride and embracing each moment and living in the present.
Okay, thanks for that, Navneet. So your superpower is embracing the moment and living in the present, as well as your family. I think that's the second superpower. Mrunalini, what about you? Your biggest challenge and superpower that you have used?
So one of the challenges that I had, and I would not like to use this as a challenge, use the word challenge for it, is the motherhood. Because whilst I started the career, I had 2 kids. A conscious decision was taken by me to take a little break from the work, sabbatical from the work. And I'm really very happy and proud to say that I did take a sabbatical for 15 years. Now, this kind of a sabbatical was only to be able to look after the children so that I can concentrate myself. But that did not deter me. And the superpower, if at all I may use that word, which Shubika, you have said it, the superpower was just my grit and determination and the support of the family to be able to get back into the legal practice and work hard, because by then I think I had done to a large extent for my kids, and there was very little of balancing that I had to do. So then post that I could concentrate on my work. And of course, it's all it's your family, it's your friends. And I think more importantly, if you believe in what you're doing and if you want to succeed and you're determined to do that, then I think really nothing can stop you. So it's just the way you look at it, the way you perceive it, whether it's a challenge, is it a setback? It was something which was there. I don't look at it that way. I thought that gave me more strength to come out after I sort of devoted my time to the children, to come out into the workplace and to do a little bit of work, whatever I'm doing right now. I think that's what it is.
So a conscious choice with the superpower of grit and determination. So thank you for that. And Lakshmi, over to you.
Yes, I want to first, before we end, thank IACC for this great opportunity to hang out and talk to all these dynamic women and hear their counsel. I want to thank Rocky for inviting me. I got to meet her as part of the Global Entrepreneur Summit, I believe, and then even when they came to the US for the Select USA, the delegation. So I was always and continue to be incredibly impressed with her. I want to tell you that my superpower was anointed to me by my husband. I'll tell you why. I grew up in a very male, my father's very conservative. And so the idea was that there's certain things you can't do. And I've always been very outgoing. My grandfather came to the United States in the 1940s, my dad in the 60s. So, you know, you think that with all this American influence, those ideals were always there. So when I started working, I would always come into these situations where everybody wanted they didn't want, you know, back then I looked young, not now, but back then I looked young. I was brown and I was a woman. And the idea of a super lawyer was a gray-haired white man. And it was the day I came to realize that I could never be a gray-haired white man. That's a fact. So I had to be truly authentic to myself. So I remember the first time I came up in that situation where I was at a place and I was competing with, I called up my husband. I said, you know, I am a second-year associate. There are all these senior attorneys from, you know, and big companies, and he said, just go there and be you. They all have, there's a lot of CEOs there, but you need to go there and be you. And he's been saying that to me, resonating it out. So the first time I did that, I was on stage with Gates and Bill Gates' father's law firm. Managing partner was speaking, Lenovo vice president, and SAS, a head executive from SAS. And then there was me. And we were talking about expanding offices internationally. So these men get up and they say, my team did this, my team did this. And the MC kept getting my name wrong. He couldn't say Challa. So at the end, I got up and I said, first, you got to get my name right if I'm going to get anything out of this. And I sang the song Brown Eyed Girl. And in the chorus, it's Shala la la la. So I said, if you can't say Challa, think of the song, sing Shala, and the whole audience started singing with me. And then I said, you know, I am my team. I don't have teams. So this is what I did. And I went into some practical, you know, ways in which they could explain what challenges they would come up to. And it was received so well. And since then, I keep reminding myself that it doesn't matter whether you're the big CEO, it doesn't matter where, or you're not the middle-aged white man. If you are authentic to yourself and you are talking your truth, then you are the biggest person in the room. So my superpower is the ability to just grow very big. Very small.
Amazing. So I'm just taking a look at the questions that we've received. And a lot of those I think we've addressed here in our conversation. If there's anybody who has anything additional, if you want to speak now, speak quickly before we wrap up this this panel. We'll just give them a few seconds to see if there are any questions, any additional questions. None. So are there any thoughts that Navneet, you, yeah, Mrunalini, please go ahead.
I just want to ask you one question, Shubika. You moderate so many of these things. How many men, if you have asked them the question, what is your superpower for your success and what you are, have said it's been my wife and my family support, which is there. I think that's where the difference between what a woman and a man is. A woman will give credit to her children, to her husband, as Navneet said, to the in-laws and to the social family structure which is there, because it's a very inclusive thing about a woman. She wants to include everybody in whatever little success that she does. How many men would say that today I am what I am because my wife stood by me, my kids stood by me, my in-laws, my parents stood by me, and that is where I am. And with utmost regards to and respect to Naushad and Saurabh here, nothing personal, nothing this. It is just a thought that all ladies in different parts of this globe, and they all are saying the same thing. That is something so important about being a woman and contributing to the society besides the family. Don't you think so, guys?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
In fact, I did a program for about 500 people on Saturday, and I asked them their superpower, and it was predominantly male, and not one of them said their family and wife. So they, talked about various other attributes that they had. So that was, well, yeah, sure.
One quick thing. I want to give a shout out to my father only because the point I was making earlier to say that all these things do get instilled very early on. So I remember growing up where my father did the dishes, he did the cooking, and this is going back like the years. And they actually live in Iran. They moved from India to Iran, but and they had cloth diapers. He washed the cloth diapers. He cut all our nails, and so just to kind of show that really these things get instilled early. So my brother to see all that, along with us to see that, I kind of expected that was to me that was the norm, that my husband must do the same, and for my brother that was the norm, that he must do the same. So I think a lot of these things, both mother and father bear a responsibility for the next generation to instill those things in our homes much early on, so that becomes the norm for the next generation.
Just quickly, one last thing. I just wanted to say, women give back every dollar they earn, they give back 60 cents to the community. Guess how much men give back? 30 cents to the community. So equal pay, gender parity and equal pay is not only good for women, it's good for the community because more money is going back into community efforts. So that was my last comment.
So thank you all for a lovely panel session this evening. I know we've taken up more than your time, so I'm gonna sign off on this note and hand it over to you, Naushad.
Thank you. You've been great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. I'm going to request my able Vice President Saurabh Shah, who has worked tirelessly to put this program together. So while he's going to thank the rest of you, I'm going to thank him and request him to take over. Thanks, Saurabh.
Thank you, Naushad. It is indeed a privilege and honor to present the vote of thanks on this occasion. First and foremost, I would like to thank my regional president, Naushad, for conceptualizing this digital session and for giving me this opportunity to work on this. Thank you, Naushad. I would like to thank Rotary Club, Bombay Central, for partnering with us. Thank you, Mr. Ramesh Daswani and Ms. Nilima Singh, President of the Rotary Club, Bombay Central. I would like to extend my gratitude to the IMC Ladies Wing for partnering with us. Thank you, Ms. Anuja Mittal. My heartiest gratitude to the panelists who have discussed at length the laws and regulations which safeguard the rights of women in this to great nations, the two largest democracies of the world. A lot has been done, yet there is a long way to go to make sure that women live without any hesitation in our society. Women's safety and giving equal opportunity is not only the need of the hour, but that basic human right as we as a society, government, and the judiciary will fail in our duty if we cannot do so and provide this. In my opinion, this is the motto of the survival of social life. Thank you very much, our esteemed panelists, for throwing light on the subject and for enlightening us with the rights and laws that already exist. Thank you, Ms. Karuna Nundy, Ms. Lakshmi Chala, Ms. Mrunalini Deshmukh, and Ms. Navneet Bhalla. Thank you, Shubika, for encapsulating the perspective on the issue which needs discussion at length. Marvelous job done. Thank you once again, Shubika. Also, I would like to thank the Secretariat of IMC, Rotary Club, and IACC for all their support and cooperation. Last but not the least, I bestow the gratitude upon the audience who have been actively participating in all our programs, all our digital sessions, and especially in today's program. So once again, thank you to one and all. And with the permission of all the dignitaries, I would like to close this program. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Naushad.
And have a great day. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.